Good morning. Thank you for being here. So we wanted to take the opportunity this morning to address public safety to the people directly in the city of Seattle, in all of our neighborhoods. We want to be open and transparent about both the hand we're dealt and what we're doing about it. So the fact of the matter is we have seen an increase in violent crime. The increase started back in 2020, as many of you know, continues today. In 2021, to give you some statistics, aggravated assaults increased by 24% over 2020. Shootings and shot-fired incidents increased 40% to an all-time high. Overall violent crime increased by 20%, reaching the highest level we've seen in 24 years. This elevated level of violent crime continues today. What are we doing about it? That's why we're here. I've directed Chief Diaz, and you'll hear from the chief momentarily. I've directed Chief Diaz to focus his efforts on those places in our city where crime is concentrated first, disrupting the lives of the people who live and work there. I've also directed Chief Diaz to focus on the relatively few individuals causing the most harm at these places, with a special focus on those using guns. This work is underway now. An excellent example of this has been happening in Little Saigon at 12th Avenue South and Jackson Street. For those that work and live around here, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Working with the community, including the restaurant and shop owners in Little Saigon, our police officers in the first 21 days of January made 23 felony arrests, 14 misdemeanor arrests. In addition, officers recovered stolen property on 24 occasions. They seized narcotics 10 separate times. They engaged in over 100 other interactions with shop owners. And again, this is within our first 21 days. These interactions included providing medical assistance. These are non-arrest interactions, many of them, referring people to social services, recommending others for a diversion program so they wouldn't face arrest, and giving dozens of warnings that if continued criminal behavior would continue, they would result in arrests. So these police efforts, combined with the work of the residents and workers, continue today in Little Saigon, and you'll continue to see the results that we will achieve. You'll also see these results in other neighborhoods. So I want to be very clear. In Seattle today, we will not tolerate violent crimes of targeting our most vulnerable people. And by that I'm describing our children, the elderly and disabled, immigrants, those experiencing homelessness. We will not tolerate organized retail theft, which has become rampant in Seattle, causing businesses to close and leave our city. It's as simple as that. We will not tolerate that. We will not tolerate crimes that signal a city is out of control or looking the other way. These include car break-ins and open-air drug markets. We will not tolerate crimes that create intense fear, such as residential burglary. And will not tolerate crimes of hate that target people because of who they are or what they are from. And we recently knew what happened in this regard with respect to our Jewish community. With respect to homelessness, and we all understand the intersection between homelessness and crime, we've seen an increase in encampments in our city. We will all soon see an increase in our efforts to bring unsheltered people inside and ensure that our parks and our sidewalks are open and safe for everyone to enjoy. And you'll hear later from Deputy Mayor Tiffany Washington on some of the efforts we've recently done, again, within the last 30 days. Excuse me. Later this month, in February, Dow Constantine, the King County Executive, and I will announce further efforts to house those living outside. And as these efforts are underway, we will not look the other way when people engage in disruptive behavior and committing crimes. They are destroying the fabric of our neighborhood. But I need to make another approach very clear, and I'll speak to those who are living with substance use disorder. For any of those that could hear my words somehow, we want you to know that we'll do everything we can to help you. It's as simple as that. We'll allow them to speak with outreach workers and to learn about emergency housing and drug treatment options. The city government will continue to spend tens of millions of dollars to provide you and others with shelter and care and services that are so desperately needed. We want and will help you. And finally, I want to share a few thoughts about our police department. The fact of the matter is I inherited a depleted and demoralized police department. We have lost a staggering number of officers over the past 2 years, nearly 350. So the numbers would indicate that our police department today is staffed at the same numbers that they were staffed back in the 1990s, and this is just not acceptable. Chief Diaz has told me that he cannot deploy enough officers to keep our city safe or meet the response time parameters that he has set, that we do not have optimal conditions in this regard. So we're going to rebuild our police department and have the right kind of officer and the right number of officers, and I've talked about that in the past and have provided you with specific numbers. We must rebuild our police service to the staffing levels necessary to respond to emergencies and protect all people and those who come here to work and tourists, and we'll hope to see that kind of vibrancy once we get past the COVID and Omicron crisis. And finally, I want to speak directly to our police officers. We welcome good work. We want to help you prevent crime from happening, and when it does, we want you to investigate and bring those responsible to account. We want you to act with excellence and fairness, a genuine caring attitude toward everyone you encounter, treating everyone with dignity and respect. As mayor, I will support this activity. I will support you. And I appreciate your work on behalf of the people of Seattle. I've set a high bar of excellence, and you must perform your duties with honor and excellence and have a keen appreciation for the constitutional rights of everyone. And I know this police department will meet my expectations, and Chief Diaz and I have had numerous discussions on how we will accomplish that. We have a lot of work to do. My executive team standing with me here, they know that I work 7 days a week and no less than 12 hours a day, because when I see what I continue to see out here, I can't sleep at night. That's what I was elected to do. When I say one Seattle, I'm pointing up. I'm not finger pointing at others. So I deal in facts, not excuses. So as we move toward the stark challenges we face, we are committed to the solutions that will drive real change and better outcomes. And I want you to see some of the people that are helping me achieve this work. So in this order, you will hear a few words from Chief Diaz, a few words from Chief Scoggins, a few words from Senior Deputy Mayor Monisha Harrell, and a few words from Deputy Mayor Washington. And what I want to impress upon you, and people say, well, you know, on these press conferences, it's supposed to be all about the executive and what he or she are trying to do. No, it's about this team. It's about the 10,000 employees that I've been meeting with, saying that we are all ambassadors of change, that we will work with passion and excellence. Every department that I've talked to, I'm saying the same things because that's my job as mayor. And last, I will say that you're hearing about investments that are being made. You heard us do a press conference yesterday with Governor Jay Inslee on the close to north of $800 million of investment in homelessness in the state. I began those discussions with Governor Inslee even before I was sworn in. So part of my job as mayor to make sure we have the resources, the tools to succeed, and that's what we're about to do. So let's talk about, again, what has been accomplished here recently and what is about to come. So Chief Diaz will share a few words with you, and I'll relinquish the microphone to Chief Diaz.
Good morning, and thanks to Mayor Bruce Harrell for bringing us all together this morning to discuss how we can address rising crime rates in the city of Seattle. You've read our 2021 report. You've seen our statistics. Overall crime last year in Seattle was up 10% over 2020. Violent crime increased by 20%, and much of that violence is gun-related. Nearly every month last year saw more shots fired incidences than the same month from the previous year. And homeless-related shootings and shots fired increased by 122% over 2021. We recovered over 3,200 shell casings, an increase over the year before. And 612 shots fired, that's almost 2 shots fired a day, with an average of 5 rounds being shot on each incident. It's not just a crime that's unacceptable, but who is being impacted. Disproportionately, 52% of all the shooting victims are black males between the ages of 18 to 25 years of age. Domestic violence and road rage shootings are up. And I know this increase is disturbing to you, the people of Seattle. It disturbs me and the city of and the entire SBD, because we know we can do better. But we all need to be part of the solution. We need community's help in identifying those who prey on our community members. We need to ensure people have the right resources and access to services. And we need more police officers. I've been doing community walks, meeting with business owners and residents. I hear people's concern and what everyone is dealing with. Crime is going up. Our officers are working hard to address what the city is facing. Our officers are saving lives daily. They're applying tourniquets, chest seals, and a variety of other life-saving measures when we secure scenes of violence prior to fire being able to arrive in. We've continued to recover over 1,000 guns each year for the 5th straight year. We've recovered over 600,000 fentanyl pills in 2021. Our officers with limited resources are making arrests for burglaries, robberies, and homicides. Every day we recover guns, some used in multiple incidences. We're working around the clock. We work through the entire city, which is why we need our police officers. I'm committed to ensuring that we're driving down our 911 response times, that I'm committed to addressing our overall crime issues. I've stepped up our gun violence emphasis throughout the city. And we will continue to work with our community partners on preventing crime in our neighborhood. As the mayor mentioned, we have another set of hot spots that we're looking at, 12th and Jackson being one of them, where we're deploying our levels of resources throughout all of, not just our patrol resources, but our community response resources, our detectives, and others to actually address and drive down the crime. But we also must work with all of our city departments and be able to use the tools that they have as well on resources and being able to provide those that are living unsheltered the needs that that help them out to get off the streets. Thank you, everyone, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chief. We hear from Chief Scoggins from our fire department.
Good morning, all. Harold Scoggins, Fire Chief. Mayor, thank you for inviting me this morning to share a little bit about the fire department and some of the challenges that we're facing out there. In 2021, the Seattle Fire Department ran over 94,000 calls for service, and that's pretty significant coming out of the pandemic year where we ran about 80,000 calls. But what's more important to note is about 12,600 of those calls were to the homeless population, to encampments, to RVs, to people living on the street, which is up significantly from where we were in 2020 and 2019. That becomes very important because when we respond to these encampments and other places, oftentimes these fires, they get into buildings, they connect to the brush on the freeways and different things like that. And to give you a perspective, in January, we ran about 5 fire responses a day to homeless encampments and about 33 medical responses a day to homeless encampments. That's pretty significant because of all the hazards that we face. Our Health One team has been deploying daily to try to do preventative measures to bring people out of homelessness, and they have been working around the clock, building relationships, and even with that work that continues to go on, these challenges are still in front of us and they're still very real. But our team is deploying each day to try to bring people out of homelessness. On the scenes of violence calls, in 2021, we ran over 400 scenes of violence calls, and that's up from just over 300 in 2020. That's how significant it is. We've had to change policy in the Seattle Fire Department on how we respond to these calls. And just this week, we sent out a new policy changing our deployment tactics. Now, when we go on any of these 400 calls, we are deploying our ballistic vests and our ballistic helmets, and we're actually staging 4 blocks out. That's a change. We left discretion up to our company officers on when we would deploy our ballistic gear. So that is a significant change for us that we've just deployed. And staying 4 blocks out. That's important. Oftentimes, we have ended up in places that were unsafe for our firefighters to be, where people have been assaulted, or their stabbings, or their shootings. So we're being very intentional in how we connect with Seattle Police Department before we enter these scenes. That becomes very important for the safety of our firefighters in order to do good work to serve the community. So those are just a couple of changes that we're doing with Health One and with our deployment tactics around scenes of violence. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. We'll hear from Senior Deputy Mayor Monisha Harrell.
Thank you. As you all know, public safety is a much broader topic than just police and fire. Public safety is all of the tools that we need in order for people in this city to actually feel safe, and that is going to also include mental health supports as well as supports for substance abuse for those who have gone through this very tough time. The one thing that should be very clear with this team is that we understand the holistic approach to what it is going to take to bring public safety to the city of Seattle. One of the most important things is resources, and that is taking an inventory of all of the resources that we have at our disposal. One of the things that we know is that over the many years of our society, whenever we've had a problem that we don't know what to do with, we've always thrown it on police. You call 911. And, you know, not meant to be a joke, but even during the holiday season, during Thanksgiving, they have to remind people not to call 911 when you don't know what temperature to cook your turkey at. So we have to understand that our challenges with public safety come also from right-sizing how we direct people in our system to what they need. So you've heard from our police chief and you've heard from our fire chief today, but also understand that our vision for public safety goes beyond just those 2 departments. It goes to how do we set up the proper mental health support systems. It goes to, do we need police or fire for every single response that we have out there? And again, I'll repeat, every time we've not known what to do with a societal problem, we have thrown that directly on our police department to solve. And our fire department has done a fantastic job of stepping up in those opportunities where our police department has been depleted. But we have to do more than that. And that is where our focus will be over the next year. Is what are the other avenues that we will be taking in order to ensure that we are not throwing every single problem within our police department and spilling that over to our fire department. It is very important that we have the community's input in these processes. And so you will see us reaching out to community. Be it virtual or in person, we will use all the tools available to us to ensure that community is part of this process, and to also ensure that through this we are also working with the community to educate as to the other tools that will be available instead of just calling 911 and expecting just strictly a police or fire response. This is important work. If we were to rush into this in just the first month, we could make some mistakes. We know we have limited resources, and when you have limited resources, it means you have to be deliberate. We will be deliberate in that action and in that response. So we want you to know that we hear you, we understand the challenges. We know that it goes far beyond the resources we have available to us right now, but we will be working to expand those resources. You've heard from the mayor that we are aggressively seeking resources from the state. We will also be aggressively seeking resources from the federal government to be able to ensure that this great city can return to the safety that we know it can have. And so with that, I want to pass it over to Deputy Mayor Yamaguchi.
I'll take
Washington.
Yamaguchi.
Well, Kendi can be next.
Thank you, Senior Deputy Mayor Harrell. Good morning. Again, my name is Tiffany Washington, and I'm the Deputy Mayor of Homelessness and Housing for the Mayor Harrell's administration. On January 4th, in his inauguration speech, Mayor Harrell made a commitment to develop a plan, take this off, that would be public-facing and transparent within the first quarter of 2022. This plan would begin to lay out a roadmap of how we would accomplish our collective goal of ensuring that Seattle City parks, playgrounds, sports fields, public spaces, sidewalks, and streets remain open and accessible to all. Today, I want to provide a few updates on what I, along with city staff, community, and providers, have accomplished since January 4th. Before I begin, I just want to make clear that the issue of homelessness and public safety are not one and the same. While there are overlaps, my role here is to provide a broad overview of our work specifically to address the homelessness crisis. The mayor, as well as our neighbors across Seattle, have set the expectation for a clear plan and visible progress. This is not an issue we can solve overnight, but in just 1 month, we can point to needed action as we continue to develop new and more effective systems to act with urgency and compassion. This work includes partnering with CEO Mark Dones to successfully shift nearly $113 million of city investments in homeless services over to the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, who is responsible for leading a unified and coordinated approach to addressing homelessness across Seattle and King County. We know to be successful requires a true regional response, and I have great faith in Mark's ability to lead impactful change that is guided by executive leadership provided by Mayor Harrell and other members of the governing committee, and the voices of people with lived experience. We are in the process of realigning existing internal city resources to increase system effectiveness. This means we can and are more efficiently deploying resources and improving our customer service and feedback loop. We will have one database that captures all resident issues and concerns and provides a response to residents in a timely manner. This will include development of a public-facing dashboard to display key and accessible metrics about our work, helping clearly demonstrate our plan and our progress. Finally, we've begun concentrated work at Upper Woodland Park. A team of people meet every week to discuss how to meet the needs of both the housed and unhoused residents in that neighborhood. This collaboration includes Councilmember Strauss, the Finney Neighborhood Association, REACH, the King County Regional Housing Authority, city department staff, and the mayor's office. This partnership is an example of what the mayor means when he speaks of One Seattle and the powerful work we can do together. I would like to close by repeating what I believe to be a very powerful statement from Mayor Harrell, and exemplifies the spirit in which we do this work. In One Seattle, we do not allow people to suffer on our streets and sidewalks. We will be intolerant not of the people who are unhoused, but of the conditions that cause them to be unhoused. I look forward to sharing more with you, including further details on new developments and efficiencies as time progresses. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Yamaguchi. With that, we'd field a few questions if you like, and I'm going to ask our Director of Communications, Jamie Housen, to assist me in that regard.
Hi. So I know that there, over the course of the decades, have been a few sort of geographically focused public safety strategies, Third and Pine most notably. What geographic attempts at, or geographically restricted attempts at improving public safety haven't been tried that SPD could try now at a place like 12th and Jackson? Or what lessons have been learned from those past attempts?
I'll answer the question to the extent I do understand it. What I've asked the chief in numerous meetings, along with Director of Public Safety, Andrew Meyerberg, who is here in the room. First of all, tell us, let's showcase where these quote unquote hot spots are. Where is the most intense criminal behavior? We have to inventory our assets. How many officers do we have capable of helping respond? We also, with my work with Director of Public Safety, we contact the defense bar, the defense lawyers, because as we go out and we contact Deputy Mayor Washington, because our approach is this. We want to make valid, lawful arrests when appropriate. We want to get people treatment when appropriate. We want to make sure, and that's why I just can't snap my fingers and crack down on a certain person, because as police work would go or suggest is that you also want to make sure it's a valid arrest. And the last thing I want under our administration are invalid arrests, racial profiling, that kind of activity. So what we're doing, again, within the last couple of weeks, in addition to the work we're doing with sound transit and climate change and some of our transportation issues, and I can go on some other issues, and filling our cabinet with the right leaders. In addition to all of that, we're asking the chief again, and you're going to hear some more rollouts here in this month and the next month about how we're going about that. So the first part, again, there's not a button to be pushed in this city of Seattle. And people have to understand that. We are building systems right now. We're building a multifaceted interdepartmental systems to look at the whole gamut of public safety. As Deputy Mayor Monisha Harrell suggested, it's just not a 911 call that works. That is an ineffective strategy, just calling 911. So you'll hear more, you will see more of the plan here, particularly on the homelessness side and the public safety side. But again, it begins with analysis that the police department are providing for us on how to approach this, and it's a multifaceted approach with many departments.
Amari?
Yeah, I had a question for Chief Diaz and for you, the Mayor. When you talk about gun violence disruption, King County has put an investment in specific programs targeting and disruption and around big data, around response to hospitals and things like that. The last administration also put a $2 million investment into that. How closely is Seattle Police Department working with King County in collaboration to address, work with those programs? And the second thing is that Mayor Durkin, before she left, made an outreach to victims and specifically the mothers of victims, and trying to build a bridge there. I'm interested to know what your administration is doing as far as outreaching to victims in our community.
Yeah. Great question with respect to gun violence in particular. So let me react to that. The first thing we did is we looked at the work that the county is doing, and one of the chief leaders in that work was Mr. Derek Wheeler-Smith. He's in that space. He was one of the leaders of the county. So we recruited him. He now works for the city of Seattle. That's the first thing we did. And through that, in our hiring of Davida Briscoe, who is our gun prevention community liaison, working with community organizations, we've made sure that there's a exchange between those two to go out and help communities dealing with against, I know the great work your mother does, and some other organizations out there. So right now, and with, I should also mention that Gerald Hankerson, a current NAACP leader, is also doing this work. Right now, they are meeting with communities, victims, mothers who are traumatized by the violence, and our expert, our liaison person, Davida, is a grieving mother as well who lost a son to violence. That they are working now as we speak with communities, making sure that our investment strategy this year and the years to come is the right strategy, and we're dealing with the right organization. So we have that work underway with those individuals that I met. With respect to actively working with the county, I can't speak to that. I have not personally been in those meetings, but I know there's some of these discussions are occurring with Mr. Wheeler-Smith and Davida. Chief, did you have anything to add on that one?
I can talk to you a little bit about it. So we have been meeting with the county on a routine basis to look at best practices. We've brought in Cities United and a variety of different other partners. And some of this group that Cities United actually started during President Obama's administration. And you take some of that, what is occurring across the country, whether it's Louisville, a variety of other cities that have experienced high levels of violence, and trying to find those solutions to it. And we want to bring some of that to Seattle as well. And we've been at those discussions and trying to also make sure that we help facilitate that. After the 3rd and Pine shooting just 2 years ago, I immediately was actually advocating for a critical incident response, and that's actually where Community Passageways had stepped up and started, really focusing on responding to when shots are fired, doing the potentially trying to drive down retaliatory shootings, and that work has, really been really immense. I mean, we've seen, gang-related shootings start to go down, and so I think that work has some real promise in what we're trying to do. But we've also seen shootings across the city that are not necessarily gang-related, but it could be homelessness. It could be RV, encampments. It could be related to road rage and domestic violence. And so we have to have a comprehensive look at everything, the reason why somebody's willing to pick up a gun and pull that trigger.
I want to thank you for that, Chief. I want to stick on that question just for a minute, because gun violence, and I mentioned that in my opening remarks, I think everyone in this room realizes that our country has a problem with the use of guns in this country. Recently, you read about President Biden visiting Mayor Adams in New York, again, a city with 36,000 police officers, about some of the gun problems they're having in New York. That I look at this sort of twofold. One are the people pulling the trigger, and we're trying to identify, again, this is our data work, who's pulling the trigger. Different people or different demographics. We're trying to understand, are people walking around with untreated trauma? Are they not? Is there learned behavior we can help them with, et cetera? That's some of our community-based solutions. The other fact of the matter is we have too many guns poured into cities and into our country. And you will hear this year me lead efforts on trying to get relief from the exemption, RCW 9.41.290. You hear me talking about that. I don't know how many lives have to be lost before we realize we are one of the few states that has that kind of restriction, allowing the state to govern the laws we need for our city of Seattle. My proposition is that every city should be able to look at that space, because I know what kinds of things I would like to be able to do if I had that flexibility as a mayor and our city council had the flexibility as a legislative body. So you're going to hear, in addition to short-term strategies and short-term investments, how we can get out from under that law. And I ask anyone who's listening to help us in these efforts. So that's part of our legislative agenda that we take very seriously, because, again, we are one of the few states that have that kind of restriction. Thank you for your question.
Sarah, Grace, and then Matt, and then we'll have time for one or two more.
Mayor, you mentioned wanting to act on lawful, valid arrest. Can you explain what, in your mind, the threshold for that is? And then Chief Diaz, can you also speak to your standard on that when you react to these calls?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear because the mask went.
Sorry, you mentioned reacting
I heard most of it.
to lawful, valid arrest. Can you explain what the parameters of that is in your head? What's your threshold?
Sure. Well, I don't know how to explain it other than saying that lawful, valid arrests, that if we see a person that is engaging in overt criminal conduct and the officers believe that they have sufficient intel to make a valid arrest, and that the filter by which they use is consistent with our race and social justice work, that would be a valid arrest. And so, not being a police officer, but being an attorney, somewhat well-versed in this, I could describe to you what, there could be exigent circumstances, there could be someone snatching a purse, there could be an open-air drug dealing exchange, these kinds of valid arrests. There's, for example, on 12th and Jackson, as an example that I mentioned in my remarks, there's sex trafficking, there's fencing of stolen goods. And in those situations, and I'll be candid with you, that if a person is just holding a television in a box and selling it to another person, while you and I may assume that it's stolen, we don't know if it's stolen. So that would be a situation where there's some level of intelligence you have to gather. But when I think of the kinds of arrests I was describing, were someone committing a crime, and we know that we know it when we see it. So, I don't know how more specific I could be. Chief, would you like to help your mayor out on that one?
So there are legal standards, so reasonable suspicion and reasonable suspicion to stop somebody, probable cause to make that arrest. And what we've actually done as part of the consent decree is every stop that we do, it goes through what we call a Terry template. It gets evaluated. We have a robust level of accountability as part of that consent decree. So right now, there is going to be a presentation by our monitor next Tuesday to the community that is going to focus on an evaluation of a year worth of stops that the Seattle Police Department did. And so we always want to make sure that people are aware of that presentation, but also aware of the evaluation that goes into it. And I believe that this last year, over 99% of our Terry stops were ruled constitutional. And so, and then when they're not, then they have that accountability process to what the mayor was talking about, that there is some level of robust accountability to ensure that either it's retrained or somebody is disciplined for their actions.
Walk away.
So, Mayor, I feel this is like a broken record question because you talk about arresting people, but again, a lot of arrests in the city of Seattle are misdemeanors like car thefts, shoplifting, crimes that people have been complaining about for years, and those people aren't even being booked into the county jail and they're back on the street repeating crimes. Doesn't it seem like there's a gap here in your plan on the back end to keep people detained so they won't reoffend?
No, not in our plan. Not in our plan.
But shouldn't you be working with the justice to keep them off the streets?
So what I will do is stay in my space. My space right now will be to make sure that any arrests that are made are lawful and consistent with the lens by which I said it. The city attorney and the King County prosecuting attorney, their job is to prosecute. The judges, their job are to sentence. That's their lane. So you will hear my request that, number one, and you're talking to someone who's actually defended people and talked about sentencing, you'll hear that I suggest that they have valid, just, fair sentencing. As simple as that. I have to protect the city. I understand that. But I also have to stay in my lane and work with the other elected people. And remember, those are all elected positions. And so to the extent the public wants them to do a certain way, they should do that. Make their voices known on the sentencing or the prosecutorial piece. Our space should make sure the arrests, should they be made, are valid arrests. And I just wanted to say something. The reason I walked away from the microphone is to Omari's question is, he talked about grieving mothers. And I wanted to acknowledge the fact that we have a grieving mother, a son that was lost to gun violence, and Miss Sinclair, who we have a family connection, I would say, grew up with her mother. So, Omar, to your point, again, that question sort of resonated with me because that's why we're trying to do the work we're trying to do. We have grieving mothers that we have to recognize who's lost their children to gun violence. But anyway, that's my response, Matt.
Can I get a follow-up with Tiffany?
There's only time for one more question, so you got to give it to somebody else. Justin?
Can you talk more specifically about where these hotspots will be, how they were prioritized, and how they're any different than some of the emphasis areas that were in effect, like when you were on the city council?
Sure. Well, if you want to know where, just read the blogs. The public knows where they are. Most people know where they are. The police department knows where they are, so I don't want to start calling out intersection, calling out streets. We know right now Seattle is hurting for action, and so I don't think it's appropriate right now to start targeting. I mentioned 12th and Jackson because that's close to City Hall, and we're recently dealing with the Chinatown International District PDA people and others about that crisis. But I don't want to, at this point, in all due respect, start naming intersections or naming areas. But I think that anyone that's been around Seattle will know that we have some very troubled areas. Chief, if you want to say something specific, but that's, at this point, quite frankly, these are what I will call valid police strategies, and I think it's just a little inappropriate to start naming intersections at this point. But I would also say this. As my director of communication looks at me when I start riffing these responses, that I'm very cognizant of working with the defense lawyers, that in criminology work, there's a part of a surprise element, often. There's often a part where you are resetting community norms. Director of Strategic Initiatives, Tim Burgess, gave me a book many years ago that I read, as it was when brute force fails. And in that strategy, it talks about you announce what you're trying to do. You even let the criminals know. You let the defense bar know. You let the city know we're cleaning up certain areas. And so we're going to employ some of the tactics in that book that we think make a lot of sense, and other types of readings that I've read on how to reset community norms. That's what we're trying to do. And the norms we want are safety.
Can I ask Deputy Mayor Washington a question about homelessness? We haven't addressed that at all. She spoke to it.
I know, Tiffany, I think you have time after this. So, yes.
So Erica and Deputy Mayor could connect off
Well,
record.
if anybody can stay longer, that doesn't have a time constraint, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, so let me just say this in closing, that another part of my inauguration is to be accessible to you. So I hope to be accessible. We're working out our cadence now. But the fact of the matter is that in 1 month, we've been working feverishly. And I don't think anyone is more upset at some of the conditions we see. Perhaps they are. I know how I feel as mayor of this city. That when I see crime, when I see people still living unhoused, I have a sense of urgency. We're not sitting around here, my executive team, we know how hard we are working. We want the people to see tangible change, and they expect it and they want it and they demand it. So we're working on it. We're working on it feverishly, and I hope you'll see more of what we're doing here in the weeks and months to come. So thank you very much for attending our conference this morning.